Welcome back. On this video, we're going to address questions that come up around personal property. And personal property really triggers the biggest amount of emotions between yourself and your inner emotions and you being the referee or the one in charge of the estate. So now you're interfacing and impacted by everyone else's because there's so many memories around personal properties. What is personal property?
Right.
How do you differentiate what isn't?
So take the house, turn it upside down, shake it. The things that are going to fall out is personal property,
There
right?
you go.
The house is real property,
Okay.
right?
There are some nuances to it.
That's
because
right.
you can have a big pallet of wood sitting in the yard, and that is personal property. It's not real property. Anything that becomes affixed or attached or built, so you take that wood, you build a shed. Now that wood has become a shed and it's now become real property. It's no longer personal property.
And so we've identified what is personal property, and now how do we address the personal property?
Many families get along beautifully through this process, and then there's some that it's not so beautiful. And one of the ways that they divvied up the personal property was they used stickies, and they had a different color one for each family member, and they went around the home and put their sticker on something that they were truly interested in having.
Did they take turns? Was it one by one? How did they do that?
They were all together at the same time, this
Right.
particular family, and they just went through that way. And so that was a case where the family really got along very
That's
well.
a beautiful way to do it.
It
I've had the
was.
opposite. We all have, where there were certain parties and heirs, not always siblings, that really couldn't be in the same room together. It was not wise. And as the personal representative, you are going to have to think about the best way to be fair about identifying how it gets distributed and how it gets addressed. One of the things that they did is the colored stickies, but nobody knew who had what color. And I thought that was really, really helpful because there was conflict. So there wasn't competition. So if there's one item that 3 people wanted, they didn't know who was vying for whatever. And there were options on how they could deal with the conflict. Like everybody wants one thing or a couple people do. Then they had other strategies on how to determine who that was. So then they had a numbering system with the colors. What were their top 10? What were their first, second, third choices? So some interesting things to think about there.
Yeah, and families going through this, some of them have chose to have 10 sentimental items that they get to address that they want, and then 10 monetary
as their top 10 choices.
Yeah.
And ironically, it's the sentimental items that are often harder because, again, people, you told us about one of your clients who the chair, wanting dad's chair was, it doesn't matter what it's worth. To them, it was priceless.
Because dad sat in there all the time and read the paper, and the grandkids were on his lap.
Right. So again, we go back to don't be surprised when some of those, there's such deep, deep meaning connected to certain personal items.
And I had a family once where a brother and sister would say, sometimes that there's jewelry. Well, oftentimes the male, if they're not married or have women, they don't really need the jewelry or want the jewelry.
Right.
So they would say, okay, well, they would look at like Monopoly money and say, okay, well, the value, right? So it's like, okay, well, this is worth $1,000. So now you pick $1,000 worth of stuff. And so it was fair in the monetary sense. So I had a brother and sister that were very good about looking at how that split up and that it was equitable, but it wasn't numerically the same, right? It wasn't like a 1-for-1 because what was there didn't necessly make a difference.
So when they live outside of the area, it's real helpful to take either videos or pictures so that those can, that can be displayed maybe on a Zoom call or somehow. So again, taking us back to having communication with the beneficiaries kind of reduces those fears and feelings of left out or not getting fair share feelings to be alleviated.
That's a really important suggestion and a tip. Is taking video and photos of all the personal belongings. Because we've talked about protecting you, protecting the estate. And that's probably personal property is definitely the one that has the most contention around it, because folks think, well, where's this or that, or didn't mom have this piece of jewelry? Like, I know that my mom, there was a theft and a lot of her jewelry was stolen. So as you go through and make an inventory of your items, super helpful to take photos of every drawer, every closet, video as you're doing it. It protects you, it protects the estate.
And it helps with your inventory of personal property, right? Like we've actually, created an easy inventory collector as just one aspect to help in that process, because it is also probably the most tedious. I mean, we were talking about, again, recently being in a hurricane, and it's the same kind of thing. You're going to leave your house and you've got to be able to say everything that was in it. And most of us don't even know what was in it. I mean, we've got so much stuff. And so really that pictures, that video is a great way to get an accurate, and then it gives you time to look through and people be, oh, I forgot about this, or I forgot about that. So that's a really great tip.
So here's some other options. Much of the time there's photos, personal photos, and those photos don't need to be divided up. With today's technology, they can simply be copied or scanned. Everybody gets the same thing.
Sometimes things can be sold, and the proceeds can be divided equally.
Oftentimes somebody wants the house, but maybe they can't afford it. They'd really like it, but they can't work it out, or they can't agree. And that's a good example of why it gets sold, and then it's divided equally. Or somebody might actually want the house, and somebody else doesn't want the house.
Right.
And then they'll say, okay, that's worth X amount of dollars. We'll deduct that from the proceeds at the end of the probate. And then
having your probate attorney will be the guide to let you know how you have to handle all of this, especially if there's a situation where people aren't getting along with things. And so we also have another video that will tell you what to do once the personal property has been distributed to the family members, and then you have what's left. So there's options on how you handle that, because this is one of the most stressful things that a personal representative has to manage, is the personal property.
Other options. We've talked about the different color stickies, the 10 sentimental, 10 monetary. Another one is birth order. Real simple. The oldest gets to go first, and you go in around robin.
Or the youngest.
Or the youngest.
You just pick.
Or you can pick it out of a hat. Pick it out of a hat.
In a nutshell, what we are serving up here is options from experiences, and coming back to, you're not alone.
Right.
So on your team, as Kim mentioned, your attorney will talk to you about needing to do this, the timeline for doing this, and how this segues into the next step of taking care of what's left over.
So you mentioned your hurricane experience. She recently really was in a hurricane, and we talked about the emotion associated with things and the surprise about how people might behave and how they might be triggered.
It was, people that know me will typically say that I am very, the person you want in a crisis. I mean, calm, level, get things done, the kind of person that gets picked to be the personal representative oftentimes. And going through this hurricane where we were actually rescued from the surge, I was unprepared after to feel the range of emotions where the simplest hassle would just bring up frustration or emotions. Like I would cry, things that would make me cry or make me be angry, all that range of the grief. And I realized there was an element of grief. It was kind of going back and connecting with our clients and people we help of how unpredictable it is, but how real, and how much it meant to have people around that could understand and give me that grace to get me through it, which is where that team comes back, where people that have seen it and know it, are able to respond in a way that is understanding and yet, getting you through that process, right? Because that's everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no journey except through it, right?
So just remember, as you're processing your own feelings and feeling overwhelmed, maybe feeling fearful, feeling lonely, or feeling angry even, or just sad, and processing your own grief, you're not alone. You have other team members who have been through these journeys, even their own personal, as well as helping others that can come alongside and say, you're doing great. Here's what you need to do next.
Mhm.